Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Joe Meade with me, and Joe, it is the last preview of the year. It's Michigan against UConn for the national championship. Number one seed Michigan out of the Midwest, obviously your team, and you've got UConn, the number two seed, out of the East. It's here, final game. Teams have had very different journeys to get here. But what are your initial thoughts with these teams squaring up tomorrow night?
Just to rub it in you and Mike's face, I was the only one between us three who picked UConn to go to the Final Four. I
Yeah,
actually have them winning in
you
my
had three out of
ESPN
four.
bracket.
You had 3 out of 4 Final Four right. Me and Mike had two.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because I think UConn all year's been probably a little overhated, and clearly that's aged pretty well. They've had some really bad losses, the Creighton loss at home and the final regular season loss at Marquette. But I tell you, Sean, Dusty Mays called it out, and a lot of coaches just kind of never want to see UConn, especially Todd Golden last year. I can tell you that was probably the most scared Florida was, including that Texas Tech and Houston game uh, when they won their national title. UConn's just a team that knows how to win in March. And Dan Hurley, say what you want. I know the Indy crowd was giving him a really hard time, during and after the game. I think that was pretty funny, actually, just being in person. This is a guy who turns it up in March. And for them to be here, to me, is not shocking. And frankly, it shouldn't be to anyone else. This is a team with a lot of veterans, a lot of guys like Alex Karabin who've played in huge games, won two national titles, of course. And they just have timely plays. Just look at the Duke game as case in point. And then finally, Sean, Michigan and Arizona have often been like, and Duke, those were the three teams all year. Everyone thought one of them would definitely be in the final, probably two. You thought Duke or Michigan or Arizona, Duke would be on a collision course. And, you know, one of them does end up in the final. It is Michigan, and I think, frankly, post conference tournament, it's very clear that Michigan was head and heels above the version of Duke we saw in the tournament and the version of Arizona we saw in the tournament. Clearly, Duke was impacted by some injuries, but I do think these are the two hottest teams, without a doubt, in the country, and I think the two more deserving teams throughout this tournament.
And UConn has just sort of bludgeoned their way through the tournament, playing their style of physical basketball. Their defense has been elite this year, and then you paired that with a little shot making, and here you are. And for Michigan, Joe, it is a team that has lost 3 games this year to Wisconsin, a team that is really uniquely built for Big Ten standards. They have bigs that can stretch the floor, and they have guards that can get downhill. You lose to Duke in that game in Washington, D.C., which was two heavyweights going blow for blow. Duke just ends up on top. And then the third loss was against Purdue in the Big Ten championship after a long, you know, couple of days in Chicago, and then Purdue just had a really good game. In terms of UConn, you mentioned some of the losses there, but this version of UConn, I don't think loses to any of those teams. Maybe even St. John's, to be honest. Although they both had pretty similar games against Duke, games that could have gone either way late. But I just think that the Big East needed this badly. They've been disrespected pretty hard by the media, and I think some of it is deserved. But the top is still the top, and you have the runner-up in the Big East in the national championship game. You have the runner-up in the Big Ten tournament, Big Ten regular season champion here in the national championship game. Before we get into the X's and O's, Joe, we do have some injury stuff for both teams. Solo Ball for UConn was in a boot at practice today. He did not participate. Look, I think he's going to go, and I think the other guy is too. But you have to think that that will be affecting him just a little bit.
Yeah, and I no doubt that the two guys in question, Solo Ball, will get to the other one for my team next. I think that will affect UConn to a large extent, probably equally to what Michigan's injury situation will be. And can I say the name now, Sean?
Yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
because, yeah,
It's
for
not a
Yaxel
secret.
Lendeborg.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I think both those guys will give it a go, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see how coaches pivot and then counter pivot because Michigan's certainly going to run some different sets, kind of similar to what they did in Arizona, which Sean mentioned they hadn't done all year, and UConn probably will do the same thing. The one thing I'll give UConn advantage here, actually, Sean, is a lot of Michigan throughout the year, aside from yesterday, had to run through Yaxel. They've run stuff, with Solo on the bench. They have plenty of guys who can
Yeah.
move the ball, facilitate Ross, Demery. I do think that him being out isn't or limited isn't going to be
Yeah, it might help them match up
a
a little better if Mullen slides
yeah.
down to the two and they can get another wing in there.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a crazy tipping point now. Certainly not going to tell you UConn has a better chance of winning because of it. But, with Michigan having Yaxel injured, kind of his athleticism is going to be on not really full display at all. His dunking, his, ability to go down, get to the paint, and converge defenders. That's going to be a huge loss for Michigan if Yaxel's not full go, which by all means, what I saw Saturday, he will not
Yeah.
be. So, I doubt you're going to see more than 24 minutes for either of these guys, is my point. They might be more of a hockey shift. Michigan
Yeah.
did that well against Arizona. I think Yaxel might actually be a depth piece for the first time all season in this game.
And I don't know if there was like a specific moment that Solo Ball did get hurt. If
Yeah.
there was, I missed it. There was a specific moment where Yaxel got hurt. He tried to go up for the layup, steps on Krivas' foot, hurts his ankle and his knee. It didn't look like he was going to come back in, Joe, based on what the broadcast was saying. They were showing him in the tunnel, sort of jogging, sort of hobbling. But then he just starts the second half, bangs a couple of triples, and plays a little bit the rest of the way. But he's clearly compromised. He's clearly not the explosive, driver that he's going to be. And you have to worry about like the adrenaline factor of it. We go back to Duke and Caleb Foster. He makes like a heroic return to play in the Sweet 16, gets all ramped up, plays really well in that first game, and then 2 days later, when the adrenaline goes down after the first game, he didn't really ever get going in that second game. So I think it will be really tough for these guys to have like a huge impact on the game on Monday, just because the adrenaline will have wore off, and they're gonna have to get it up again. I don't know if that really is the best way to go forward. And then in terms of X's and O's, Joe, like I don't think you want Yaxel running around with Mullins anyway, and the fact that he is now compromised. How do you think Dusty May will try and figure that out?
I think that's the biggest challenge, right? Do you see him even out of Terrace Reed? He's a real physical
Thank you.
forward, and
But Caravan runs around too at the four, so I don't know what they're gonna do.
yeah, yeah, it's gonna be. I really think it's gonna be a Floyd Mayweather-ish approach, and I've said that about
Yeah.
Michigan a lot this year, which is, get into the game and see what happens, and then make a judgment call from there. X's and O's wise, though, Sean, this is a very fascinating matchup because a lot of the size definitely favors Michigan in this game. But we've seen Terrace Reed do very well with size, right? I thought played really well against Michigan State toward the end of that game against Carson Cooper, who is taller than him. Played obviously excellent against Duke and Illinois. I think to be honest with you, Sean, I know Braylon Mullins hit that shot. Terrace Reed's been UConn's best player throughout this tournament.
by
I don't
by
think there's much of
by
a
far,
question.
by far.
So if Michigan can neutralize him, that is a huge advantage. Now, saying that they probably will not because there's been really good bigs and defensive veterans who have not done it all season. And the one thing Michigan could do is probably throw bodies at him, right? They have Perez, and I think both him and Mara will be switching off on him. And they're certainly going to pick up fouls between the three of them, but can Terrace outfoul them? Because I think without him in there, Michigan's got a significant advantage down low. And boxing out in this game, I can't emphasize how important that is for Michigan. They did a great job against both Tennessee and Arizona, who are the best teams in offensive rebounding in the country. And if they can continue to do that, path to victory is a lot easier for Michigan. Now, UConn, to me, Sean, the biggest story of their offense, aside from Terrace Reed, has been their timely shooting, right? Not actually a worse three-point shooting team than Michigan, believe it or not, for the season. But this tournament, man, I tell you, each time they need a big one, it's either been Caravan or Mullins. And certainly Demery and Ball haven't had their shortage either. But those two guys, if UConn's up late, like two or three, and they need a big time three, I guarantee you one of those guys will hit it. And that's a position Michigan needs to do everything they can to avoid.
And grand scheme of things here, Joe. Like Caravan's wrapping up his career. He's gonna have three Final Fours, at least two national championships, maybe a third. I think that's gonna stack up against anybody. Honestly, you have to go back to Leitner. You have to go back to some of these guys who played in a bunch of Final Fours in 4 years at the same school. There's just not a long list. Um, I would have to guess. Here's what I think Dusty does. I think Yaxel guards Demery because Demery is not a 3-point threat. You don't have to run him off. You can sit in the gaps and try and stop him from driving. Look, if there's one thing that Yaxel can do with one knee, it's you can still be physical. You might not be able to jump or run as far as fast, but I think Demery's on Yaxel is on Demery, and then I think you figure it out from there. Merez will probably have to run around with Caravan, but I think that's not the worst thing. And then those funky lineups, like you said, Joe, are Michigan going to have to go to some Roddy Gale at the 3 and the 4, or Will Cheddar at the 5? Like it worked in a really small sample. Or are UConn going to go to a little bit of a funky lineup? Are they going to load up on wings? They've got Ross Stewart, Caravan. Like, are they going to go those guys at the 2, 3, and 4? Or are they going to go two bigs with Ryba and Reed? I think we might see a few lineups in this game that we haven't seen from either team much this season.
Yeah, and the other thing here too, Sean, is bench in this game I think is going to be bigger than in most games that we've previewed this tournament. Now, not that it's not played a factor in the actual game itself, but I think Ross is going to have to come up big here for UConn. I certainly think McKenny and Gale have lived up to the challenge for Michigan, even though they do play starter minutes more often than not.
Yeah.
Those two guys could be the key, right? McKenny hit some timely shots Saturday. March or April Roddy is a way significantly better player than he is in the regular season. Can't really do the science on that. I have my own theories that I'll keep to myself. But if one of those guys can add some really good minutes and add scoring when, two of their better scores for each team being Ball and Lendeborg are limited, that's gonna help, guide each team to victory. Michigan's a 6.5 point favorite, I think 7.5 on some books. And I think the reason for that shot is they factor in that even with Yaks on the floor, they can still facilitate. He'll space the floor, whether he's hobbled or not, right? We saw them hit those two big threes in the game against Arizona. I can't say something about Ball. Ball normally is a guy, he can certainly catch and shoot,
Yeah,
but
he's really, really streaky.
yeah, he is really streaky. And without him, I guess having the full ability to pick his own shot, considering whatever the heck's going on with that boot, it's going to be really, it's going to be a lot tougher for him to pick his own shot. Not saying he can't do it. He probably's played injured before in his life, but against the defense like this, I don't think that's going to be their number one option on offense.
If Yaxel cannot be a part of the end of the game, Joe, I think it's probably McKenny who comes in. That
Yeah.
might be better matchup wise for UConn if their starters are in. Because Mullins is the 3. He's the fastest guy zipping around there. They run double staggers for him. Like, you've got to be able to communicate around the screen. It's a very tough, prep on, one day. We saw Dusty May doing it before the game, even before the Michigan game yesterday. He watched the first half and was writing down notes down there in the press section. But man, I think this is the two best coaches in the game right now, and they're both a little bit limited with very good players that are probably going to play, but how much are they going to play? You've got to prepare for the other one to be a factor, but at the same time, you might have to prepare for some other people who are not usually in these spots to get the job done. So, Joe, unless you got anything else to add, I think we'll head to predictions.
Yeah, I think 3 point shooting in this game is going to be so important. If there's a more than 5% discrepancy there without like a crazy volume of shots, that could very well be the deciding factor in this one. I just want
Yeah,
to add that.
UConn's got to make them. I think Michigan
Yeah.
makes them. It'll be a win for Michigan. I think UConn has to make them to make it a game.
And I think they have to make at least 10 to 11 at the bare minimum for
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Yeah, unless,
Yeah.
there's a lot of turnovers and transition twos and stuff. But I think it'll be a good game. I think UConn, both teams are obviously very deserving of getting here. We saw that, Illinois perhaps had a little bit of an easier path to the Final Four than most 3 seeds. Well, they're not here anymore. It's UConn and Michigan left. So, Joe, um, let's go with you first. Prediction for the national championship game.
Yeah, this one's tough. I'm really shocked that the line started off at 7.5.
I just
I
think it's
think,
Michigan's ability to blow them out. Like, I think the actual win loss is probably closer to 60-40 here.
yeah, the biggest thing for UConn, aside from the metric of 3 point shooting, is can they limit Michigan's runs? Michigan's probably going to go on 6-0 runs, and UConn has the same capabilities where teams drown immediately, like Arizona, is those runs become 14-2. 15 nothing, or in extreme cases for a pretty good team like Tennessee, 21 nothing, right? UConn cannot even allow that to happen. If UConn gets behind, like, and again, they've come back from 19 points, they're certainly capable. I don't think they want to rely on that twice, right? If Michigan gets up, 10 at a certain point and then they get up 18, that might be way too much for UConn to overcome, especially with more of a consistent paint presence from a Dymar and Perez Johnson's, assuming they stay healthy and out of foul trouble. So I think there's a lot more past for victory to Michigan. The one thing here, Sean, is UConn just is really good in these situations. I think in a close game, the UConn does win this. Michigan's probably gonna have to win this game by 10 plus. It sounds so silly, but I do think Michigan's best way to win is for this to not be a game at the end, for this to be almost without a doubt. So with that said, I don't think Michigan will be able to do that. I did pick Connecticut in a lot of my brackets. I did pick them to go to the Final Four, was one of the few people to have them even out of that region. I just think there's something different about Connecticut. I think they'll move the ball around enough. I think Terrace Reed grabs a few timely rebounds, and I think they outshoot Michigan from three, Mullins and Caravan. Give me the Connecticut Huskies to upset my Michigan Wolverines as much as it pains me to say it. I think they get them here. I think they win 82 to 80. And I think Dan Hurley has a lot of people having an uncomfortable conversation about who might be one of the better coaches of our lifetime, and certainly maybe of all time. 3 and 4 years. Give me the Huskies.
Yeah, so picking Michigan in the Final Four, Joe, worked. You're switching course here in the championship. I'm gonna go with Michigan 79, UConn 70. I just think that UConn is gonna have a tough time. Well, Terrace Reed is not gonna have as many easy looks as he typically does, and the physicality for UConn's guards is a little bit alarming for Michigan, especially Elliot Cadeau. But look, if you can toss it over the defenders to a Daimara, doesn't matter how physical they are. So I think Michigan win a game where they're up, that 8 to 13 point range the entire way, and UConn does not have a 3 point barrage late like they did against Duke. So give me Michigan by 9. But all right, Joe. Well, that is it for this video. Please check out the other ones if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.